Hello and welcome to another video in Foundations in Maternal and Newborn Health. In today's video, we're going to talk about antibodies. So in the last video, we talked about how white blood cells actually kill the pathogens that have infected your bodies. And in today's video, we're going to talk about how these white blood cells use antibodies to actually recognize these pathogens. So antibodies, as I mentioned in the last video, are also known as an immunoglobulin. So immunoglobulin, or IG for short. And so these antibodies, or these immunoglobulins, are really just flags. So that's really all you have to think of them as, is just flags for the immune system. And so they're small, sort of Y-shaped proteins. They're small proteins, and generally they look something like this. Okay, they're extremely small. I'll draw them quite a bit bigger than they really are, but they're very, very small. And as I mentioned, they act as flags for the immune system. And so you can imagine these antibodies are floating around in your blood, let's say. And if you're infected with a pathogen that this antibody recognizes, so this is a pathogen that we're saying is floating around in the blood, the antibody will actually bump into the pathogen and it will stick to it. So again, these are actually much bigger than they actually would be. Pathogens are small and antibodies are much, much smaller in comparison. But just so that you can see it, the antibodies bind and stick to the pathogens in your blood, and this acts as a flag. And so essentially your white blood cells, again, your white blood cells are much, much bigger than most pathogens, but we're saying this is your white blood cell. It will actually recognize this antibody on the surface of the pathogen, and that tells this white blood cell, if there's a little antibody on the pathogen, that this is an invader and it needs to be killed. And so the white blood cell will then kill the pathogen, as we talked about in the last video. It'll eat it and destroy it. But interestingly, the white blood cell does something more. After it eats the pathogen, the white blood cell starts actually making more of these antibodies. So it'll start making a whole bunch of these antibodies that recognize this pathogen. And so you can imagine why this would be very important, because when you're infected with a pathogen, there isn't usually just one pathogen. There's likely many, many, many pathogens all throughout your body, and they might be in your bloodstream, they might be in your lung or your liver or your bones, wherever. And so you'll have a whole bunch of these pathogens all over your body, or maybe it's localized, but there'll be far more than just one. And so these antibodies, if this white blood cell produces many, many of these antibodies will go through your entire body and recognize all these pathogens and tell your other white blood cells to eat up these pathogens and kill them. And so generally, this whole process is the basis of immunity. So we'll talk more about immunity in later videos when we talk about vaccinations, but you could see how this whole process works well together to kill all the pathogens that you've been infected with. So that's generally how antibodies work, but it is a little bit more complicated than that. There are more than just one type of antibody. So this Y shape is one particular type of antibody, but there are actually many other types of antibodies. And so your immune system actually uses different types of antibodies depending on what it needs them for. So each antibody has a particular function or a specialized purpose in the immune system. And so we'll talk more about that in the next video and why it's important and what it tells you about your patients.